who's just joining us. We're glad to have you all here this evening. We are just giving folks a few moments to join us. We'll get started a few minutes after 6, but we're excited to share some more information with everyone tonight about the new UDO. All right, for anyone who's just joining us, we are giving folks just a few minutes to join before we get started. We'll get started just a few minutes after 6. We will share some more information with you all about the new UDO. Thank you all for being here.
Hey Lisa.
Yes.
Yes, I'm not sure if it's still a problem, but it looks like someone is having trouble accessing the chat.
So yeah, we can give an intro to that when we get started, but we've got the Q&A function up in order to allow us to sorry. So that we can keep track of questions that come through, so folks can use the Q&A function in order to ask questions as we go along. That would be super helpful. And that's why the chat is not active.
Sounds good.
Thank you for calling attention to that. Thanks to everyone who's joined us so far, and thanks for your patience as we give folks just a couple minutes to join. We'll get started in another minute, and just give folks another minute or so to join this evening. All right. It is 6:05, and I think we can go ahead and get started. I am going to hand things off to our technical consultant team with Code Studio to introduce themselves and to jump in and get us started with some meeting logistics. But thank you all for being here this evening, and we're going to get started. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lisa. Hi, everyone. My name is Bertrand Behizi. I'm here with my colleagues Asha and Colin from Code Studio, and we also have a few members of the Durham planning team on the call. Before we get started with this presentation, I actually want to hand it over to our colleague, Hurtado, to talk about the Spanish interpretation features of this session.
Thank you so much, Bahisi, and welcome everyone. My name is Murtado. I'm going to be making an announcement in Spanish, a little bit about how this meeting will have interpretation from English to Spanish, but also if there are any questions in the chat, we will be monitoring the chat so that you will hear those questions in English. Muy buenas tardes, ya casi noches, y bienvenidas y bienvenidos a todos los participantes. Recuerden que pueden escuchar esta reunión completamente en español. En la parte inferior de sus tabletas o teléfonos hay 3 punticos donde dice más. Por favor, hagan clic ahí, seleccionen interpretación del idioma, español y terminado para que se active esa función. De esta manera pueden escuchar esta reunión completamente en español. También recuerden que habrá una grabación de todo el contenido de esta reunión en español si la quieren ver después. So thank you so much, Bahisi, for giving me the time. We always remind presenters and speakers to speak at a pace similar to the one you presented and opened the meeting. That was a great pace. So if you continue in that same rhythm, that's great for interpretation. And that's it for us. Thank you everyone for being here once again, and thank you for having us.
Thank you, Murtado. Asha, you can go back to the first slide.
All right.
Thank you. Good evening again, and welcome to Code Connect 5. Tonight, we'll be reviewing proposed changes to the environmental and public improvement standards of the new UDO, or Unified Development Ordinance, which fall under Module 3 of the overhaul process. This module builds on what we've discussed in previous sessions, which focused on a number of topics, including zoning districts and development standards. Next. Thank you. A few quick housekeeping items before we dive in. Please stay muted during the presentation and hold your questions until the Q&A section. This session is being recorded and will be shared publicly afterwards. And finally, please try to keep the chat or the Q&A function focused and respectful. We want this to be a productive and inclusive discussion for everyone. Next. When it is time for questions, you can use the raise hand button, or if you're joining by phone, you can press 9. We'll take questions in the order received in the Q&A session. Try to limit your questions to 1 per person. We're trying to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to participate in this discussion. If you are calling in, you can press 6 to unbutton once you've been recognized. So now that we've covered some logistics, let's take a moment to recap on our past progress and look ahead to the future. If you missed any of our earlier Code Connect meetings, you can catch up on engagedurham.com. There, you'll find recordings of our sessions, each building on the foundation for tonight's discussion. Next. So our work on the UDO is guided by 5 core goals that shape every decision we've made in this process. The first goal, organization and usability, making sure the code is easier to understand and navigate. Our second goal, housing choice and affordability, expanding access to diverse and affordable housing options. The built environment, ensuring development creates great places to live, work, and socialize. Recreation and open space, preserving room for recreational open spaces and other public amenities. And last but not least, plan implementation. So aligning future projects with the comprehensive plan to realize Durham's long-term vision. Next. So why is the UDO important? So to start, the comprehensive plan describes what we want Durham to become, our shared vision for the future. And with that in mind, the UDO can be described as the vehicle that will help us reach that future. So through the rules and regulations that guide housing and neighborhood development and investments in the public realm. So our goal is that by modernizing the UDO, we'll ensure that development in Durham reflects community goals and long-term priorities. Next. So here's the next two slides will provide a quick overview of what we'll cover tonight. So starting with Article 6, we will touch on two subsections of that article. The first one being neighborhood layout and design, including standards for lots and sublots. And the second subsection of Article 6, infrastructure and public improvement, will be streets and streetscapes, including all components of the public right-of-way. Next. In addition to Article 6, we'll also discuss the proposed changes to Article 7, environmental protection, which includes standards related to trees, open space, buffers, and water resources. Together, the proposed changes in Article 6 and 7 seek to balance community design with environmental stewardship in Durham. Next. Many of the standards in Article 6 and 7 are being carried over from the current UDO, but we've identified 4 overarching themes that encompass most of the proposed changes covered in this module. So the first is designing walkable, pedestrian-friendly neighborhoods. The second is preserving and enhancing the natural environment. The third, using land and infrastructure more efficiently. And last but not least, simplifying the UDO to make it easier to apply and understand. So with all of that in mind, let's begin by looking at how our neighborhoods are laid out and designed. So the first set of changes, as I mentioned a moment ago, relate to neighborhood layout and design. Next. So the updated standards in this section consolidate and clarify existing rules that were previously spread across multiple UDO articles into one clear, accessible location. This is part of our broader effort to make the UDO more user-friendly. In addition to the block and lot standards that we'll cover in the next slide, this section also covers related topics such as open access to lots, dead end and stub streets, street names and addresses, and the preservation of sites with historic and or cultural value. And I will also note that we've proposed block standards specific to areas inside and outside the urban growth boundary, recognizing the different development patterns in each. Next. So the updated block standards set maximum perimeters as opposed to block lengths to encourage walkable and well-connected street networks. We're further simplifying the system by defining separate maximum perimeters for both inside and outside the urban growth boundary. So roughly 3,000 square feet inside the urban growth boundary and 5,000 square feet outside. And it's not mentioned on the slide, but to add further flexibility, we've added a new standard that will allow developers to increase the maximum block perimeter by up to 50% if they include a pedestrian passage or multi-use path that bisects the site. And a future draft of the UDO will include a graphic illustration to further visualize this standard. On the right-hand side, you'll see a graphic of the different lot arrangements. So these standards ensure that every new site is accessible, properly recorded, and consistent with various other requirements. Most of the lot standards in the draft UDO are carried over from the existing UDO, but we've added further clarity around sublots. So sublots will be permitted in select zoning districts in order to support various different housing options. So they will allow smaller ownership parcels without street frontage as long as there's permanent access via an easement and compliance with other standards. I should note, however, that even though the lot sizes will be smaller, building design and quality standards will still apply to ensure consistency throughout neighborhoods. Next. Great. So I'm now going to hand it over to my colleague Asha to talk about the proposed changes to streets and streetscapes.
Hi, good evening, everyone. So I'm going to be talking about streets and streetscapes. So to start off, we've updated the street standards to better reflect modern design and Durham's goals for safety and connectivity. So these updates pull in the NACTO guidance so that these streets can support everyone, including people walking, biking, using transit, and also driving. And they tie directly into Durham's Vision Zero action plan, which is all about eliminating serious traffic injuries and deaths through better design. So through these standards, we've clarified how pedestrian passages and multi-use paths fit in as well, making neighborhoods more connected, more comfortable, and more inviting. So we can start off with our neighborhood street types. So the goal of these street types is to make the code clearer and more flexible. And to do that, we've organized these four neighborhood street types, each suited to slightly different settings. So each of these helps us design streets that balance mobility, open space, and neighborhood character in order to put people first and not just cars. So getting into this first scheme, this neighborhood street one features a 45-foot right-of-way for simple local access streets with low traffic. And one thing you will notice about this is that the scheme does not have any street parking. So all of the housing on a street like this would have to feature either driveway access, which you can see on the left side of this graphic here, or rear alley access, as shown on the right. All right. And then our second neighborhood street, this scheme adds street parking, which helps to calm traffic and adds convenience, removing the necessity for alleys and driveways, excuse me. So moving on to our third neighborhood scheme. This one brings in elevated bike lanes and buffers, so that helps to balance use of the street by both bikes and cars in a safe way by separating the bike lanes from the car travel lanes. And then this last neighborhood scheme, this notably has a multi-use trail in the right of way. So you can see that on the right side of the street where that B label is. So that helps to support active transportation and recreation in a safe way, again, by including the buffer from the car travel lanes. And this scheme also includes street parking as well. So then moving to our mixed use street types. These are for busier mixed use areas. So we're looking at 3 new mixed use street types. These are for places where people live, work, shop, the most active corridors in Durham. They have wider sidewalks, bike facilities, and even in type 3, a dedicated bus lane. And they make it easier for everyone to move around. And they're also a key for connecting neighborhoods to transit, jobs, and daily services, and make these areas both accessible and livable. So our first mixed-use street, you'll see this one also features elevated bike lanes, same as in the neighborhood street types, and also extra wide sidewalks. So here the sidewalks are 8 feet wide as opposed to the typical 6 foot. And then in the mixed use type number 2, we've introduced turn lanes to improve traffic flow and also added bus shelters to both sides of the street. And then getting into mixed use street number 3. So this is a bus rapid transit scheme, which currently Durham doesn't have a BRT line, but the street configuration gives the option to develop it in the future. So then moving into our alternative streetscapes, we've streamlined these standards for both pedestrian passages and multi-use paths for things like planting zones and pedestrian zones. So they are easier to apply and use. We've also clarified alternative street types like these that you see here, helping to tie together streets, open spaces, and adjacent sites. Overall, these changes make for a more cohesive, walkable, and sustainable neighborhood. And with that, I will pass it back to Bahizi to talk about environmental protection.
Thank you, Asha. So now that we've covered the built environment, let's turn our attention to some of the proposed changes that will have an impact on the natural environment, specifically as it relates to tree protection and open space. Next. So in this section, we are planning to integrate tree coverage and open space standards into a single framework of sorts. Our hope is that this will make the code clearer, eliminate any overlap that might exist between these related set of standards, and help align environmental goals with site plan, or site design rather. We've also introduced new opportunities for developers to invest in the built and natural environment. And this, we think that this integration will mark a step toward balancing growth with sustainability. Next. So we've retained most of the existing tree coverage standards from the current UDO, like those related to tree surveys, protection of existing vegetation, clear cutting, and major specimen trees. But we have made a few key clarifications and improvements to the tree coverage standards. First and foremost, we've clarified that the tree coverage standards only apply within the city limits for consistency. Second, as you can see here in this table, the requirements are now tied to specific zoning districts instead of the broad rural, suburban, urban tiers that are described in the current UDO. We think that this will make the rules more precise and easier to administer. And as you can see here in the table, the coverage requirements will vary by zoning district, ranging from 0 to 5% in some commercial areas to 50% in conservation zones. So despite this change, however, I will note that the percentages are relatively consistent with the current UDO. For example, the total tree coverage for large residential sites in our districts, residential districts, is, as you can see here, 22%, which matches the current requirements for residential development in the suburban tier. In addition, we also added new standards for large subdivisions, those over 4 acres, which are now required to prioritize the preservation of existing forests and mature trees before replanting. Next. So moving on to open space, the draft open space standards are now more directly aligned with the comprehensive plan goals for sustainability, recreation, and community cohesion. The most significant updates include a clearer, distinct district-based framework. So as I mentioned earlier, as it related to the tree coverage standards, we're moving away from the former tier-based system to a more district-specific system that's easier to apply and measure. Two, we're adopting an integrated approach, as you can see in this second table. The updated standards seek to bring together tree protection, recreational open space, and other design elements into a single framework. Three, we are streamlining the existing recreation land standards. So all of the existing requirements for land dedication and impact fees will now be consolidated in the same section as the other open space standards to ensure that every new residential development contributes to Durham's long-term vision for parks and recreation. And then finally, but not least, we're introducing some new open space typologies. It's not included in this slide, but the draft module includes a table that outlines a range of design options that would encourage creative, context sensitive, and multifunctional open spaces. So in the next slide, we'll take a look at some of those new open space typologies. Next. So as you can see here, this slide shows examples of some of the examples of the illustrative examples of some of the open space typologies. They include from left to right, mini parks or neighborhood playgrounds, city parks, greens, green belts, and parkways. And we also added a closed cul-de-sacs. So unlike conventional cul-de-sacs, closed cul-de-sacs are designed to be wide enough to serve as as small community gathering spaces, as you can see in this example to the bottom left. In the proposed standards, we try to discourage cul-de-sacs in new developments, but we think that closed cul-de-sacs can provide valuable open spaces in certain contexts. All in all, we hope that this wide range of options will provide developers with some flexibility to design meaningful public spaces that are bespoke to their local area. Next. So in addition to traditional open space, we also want to encourage developers to think outside the box. So in this new framework, developers may count a variety of other open spaces toward their open space requirements, including amenitized stormwater facilities, public art, and flex spaces. So regarding public art, the updated standards now allow approved public art installations reviewed by the Public Art Committee of the Cultural Advisory Board to count toward the recreational open space requirements under certain conditions. In addition, what we call flexible space includes options like green stormwater infrastructure like rain gardens and bioswales, and other natural systems that can serve dual purposes, infrastructure plus open space. So these are just some of the examples of how, this is just one example of how the module seeks to promote integrated multifunctional design to bridge the gap between the built and natural environment. Next. Great. So I'm now going to hand it over to Robin from the city of Durban to talk about the updated riparian buffer protection standards. And you can, next, Asha.
Hi, all. My name is Robin Schultz, as basically said, principal planner and arborist within the planning department. Just to talk to you all a bit about the riparian buffer standards. So essentially, as you all probably know, Durham is bisected by two different overlays. So we have, excuse me, two different basins. So in the sort of northern portion, right, we have the Neuse, and the sort of southern portion, we have the Jordan. So all of Durham County is covered. So this affects how we develop and things of that nature. What we've done for the riparian buffer section is we've updated some standards and some terminology to make sure that it's clear, what folks need to do. I know that we think a lot about riparian buffers in terms of developers and et cetera, but this also needs to be super clear when someone wants to build a porch in their backyard and there's a stream, right? Which happens all throughout Durham. So what do they need to do? What is the process? What they can and can't do, right? Like these are all like sort of complex things. So trying to sort of make sure that's clearer. Additionally, we don't have the ability per state law to essentially make our riparian buffers any wider than they are right now. We had adopted, currently we have buffers in watershed protection overlays, which are wider, which is a result. We did this prior to a court ruling, which which said that we do not have the authority to do so. However, the city and county have a Clean Water Act permit for the stormwater system. As part of that permit, it says that we have these extended buffers to help with water quality. That Clean Water Act permit is a federal permit, so federal permit, state authority, local rate. So through that federal act permit, we have the ability to retain our existing riparian buffer standards, but we do not have the ability to expand them. So retaining all of those things, making it clear. Additionally, what we've done is direct folks to the actual state legislation itself, which sort of gives you the exact language for what you need and what you can do. Previously, that was done in a table that we had sort of tried to combine the standards for the Jordan Basin and the Neuse Basin into one table. But these are two different sets of standards. And additionally, they are updated at different times. So the Neuse was updated a couple of years ago. They are currently working to update the Jordan. So instead of trying to essentially create a Frankenstein of two different, sets of rules in one table, we're saying, hey, you need to go to the state. That legislation that has a table in it, what you can do, what your options are, etc. Additionally, we are, just to clarify, uh, all of the impervious surface restrictions and all of our enhanced buffers, we are keeping. That is not changing as a result of the UDO. There is no change to the actual protection itself by acreage. Those are all staying the same. They're not changing, regardless of the underlying zoning district. That that impervious surface restriction is still in place, following the same bounds. And next.
Thanks, Robin.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. So we're actually nearing the end of our presentation, but before we turn to the Q&A, we wanted to look at a code example that illustrates the proposed UDO standards that we've covered in today's presentation, applied to a hypothetical site in one of our residential districts. The goal here is just to help visualize some of the real-world impact of these new rules on future development in Durham. So as you can see here, we identified a site that could serve as a example of greenfield development. In this example, the site would be about 52 acres, so relatively large. And this first slide is interesting because it highlights some of the topological, some of the natural features that inform the neighborhood layout and design of development if it were to take place in a place like this. So you can see that the contour lines, they reflect the rolling topography on this site. And then in the north, in the top left corner, you'll see a stream that cuts across that portion of the site. You'll also notice that we're assuming a 50-foot riparian buffer, shown in the transparent green, extending in both directions along the stream. So this first still of the 2D site plan demonstrates how developers can use the new standards to integrate environmental protection into site design. Next. So here's a closer look at how the site plan performs against the proposed standards, specifically the standards in Article 7, environmental protection. So we've, in this still, we've allocated 22% of the site to tree coverage, which is the equivalent of nearly 7 acres of tree coverage, or to be exact, 11.68 acres. Next. We've also accounted for the minimum open space requirements. So it's not clear. it's not very clear in this still, but you'll see a park, a neighborhood park in the center of the site that amounts to 3% of the site, or 1.6 acres of recreational open space. And then you'll see 3 different amenitized stormwater facilities, or 5% of the site, spread across opposites, distributed across different points on the site. So these together, we think that these last 2 slides show how we can adopt a balanced approach to tree preservation, recreation, and stormwater management. Next. So once we've accounted for natural features and tree coverage in open space, we wanted to model how we could account for a mix of housing types across the site. So this final site plan features several different housing types. First, along the perimeter, you will notice in the light yellow, standard front access homes. So these are your typical single unit homes, most with driveways. And then in the center, in the bright yellow, you have standard alley access units in the center. These are also single unit homes, but they're on smaller, narrower lots. And instead of having driveways, they have access they have vehicle access through alleys. And then you have townhomes in the light orange at the entrance of the subdivision. And then in the darker shade of orange, we've also distributed compact or affordable units. Compact as in very small homes. You could use the term cottage as a way to describe them, and then affordable as in neighborhood scale multi-unit buildings. And so as you can see here in this site plan, we've instead of concentrating them in one specific location in the neighborhood, we've made sure to distribute them evenly throughout the neighborhood. In total, this site plan would include 248 housing units, and then out of that total number, 25% of those units are reserved for townhome development. And I think this aligns with some of the targets that the city is considering for townhome development in some residential districts. Next. So here's a 3D rendering of that site plan on the previous slide that we've used to illustrate the proposed standards in Module 3. The next several slides will include essentially visual renderings that zoom into this neighborhood, where we'll be able to see more details, including different street types that connect to open spaces and a variety of housing options. Next. So in this screenshot, you can see 2 rows of townhomes at the entrance of the neighborhood. And one of I believe this would be the N4, the N4 street type that Asha covered in her previous, in her presentation earlier on in the session. That street type includes, as you can see, the wider multi-use path on one side, and then available on-street parking. Next. And then this is another image of the N4 street type. What's interesting about this still is that on one side you have the standard front access homes with the driveways, and then on the other side you have the alley loaded single unit homes on the other side. Next. Another scene of another vantage point of essentially the same scene. Next. And then this is an example of the N2 street type. As Asha explained earlier, N2 is very similar to N4. The only difference is that instead of a multi-use path on one side of the street, you have two standard sidewalks on both sides of the street. Next. Another vantage point of the same scene. I mentioned earlier how we included closed cul-de-sacs as one of the new open space typologies. This is an example of a cul-de-sac in the 3D model. Essentially, it looks very similar to your typical cul-de-sac. The only difference is that it's wide enough to accommodate a small pocket park, so to speak, which could be used by the residents in the vicinity of the area. Next. I didn't mention this. I forgot to mention it as it concerned the previous slide, but this scene also shows another one of the neighborhood scaled streets. This one is what's notable about this street is that it's narrower. It's only 45 feet instead of the 60 feet of the other street types, and the reason why the street's able to be as narrow is that it doesn't include any on-street parking. Next. Here is a aerial view of the neighborhood park that was used to meet the open space requirements. What's interesting about this scene, besides a clear shot of the neighborhood park, is that it features most of the housing types included in the model. So you have on the bottom half, you see a row of townhomes. To your right, you have the alley loaded single unit homes, and then in the corner, you actually have from left to right, you have an affordable option, so a multi-unit building situated next to two single-unit standard homes, and then a cottage court with some compact housing. And so in the next slides, we'll look at some examples of compact and affordable housing options. Next. So here is a row of RD2 compact housing, and as I noted earlier, the proposed standards clarifies how to regulate sublots, and so you can imagine that these three homes would be each of the buildings would be placed on its own sublot within a larger lot. Next. Here's another example of some RD2 compact housing, but instead of the buildings being placed in a row, the compact homes in this scene are organized around a small park or mini park, in essentially an example of a cottage court. Next. So here's an example of a three-story RD3 affordable housing building located right next to two standard single unit homes. Next. And then we have another example of a two-story RD3 affordable building next to similarly sized standard homes. Just goes to show that we're trying to imagine various scenarios for this sort of development in the context of the updated UDO. Next. All right. So now we can talk about what comes next and how you all can stay involved. Next. Okay, so there's several ways to stay engaged as we move forward in the process. You can join the scheduled in-person and virtual meetings planned for November, and I'm sure that Robin or Lisa or any of the other staff members on the call can provide you all with more information on these upcoming public engagement opportunities. As always, you can always stop by the office hours that are available throughout the year, and always keep an eye out on for additional technical Q&A sessions like the one that we just had, which will be announced by city staff. Next. Next. Awesome. So that concludes our presentation. So we'd like to open up the floor for questions and discussion. I know I've seen that people have been asking questions in the Q&A chat, and staff have been responding in kind. But yeah, we appreciate your patience, and we look forward to hearing your thoughts and your further your thoughts and comments on the proposed changes to the UDO, and we look forward to your continued participation in this process. Thank you. All right, Robin and Lisa, should we start by addressing some of the questions in the Q&A?
Sure.
And so
I've been trying to type furiously.
I've
Robin,
seen
let me handle this if you want to keep responding to things. We wanted to make sure that everybody knows what questions are being asked and the answers for those. So we've been able to get through a lot of the questions as they've come in, but just wanted to kind of go through and make sure that that information is accessible to everybody who's participating. So we've had a few different questions on the content as we were going through. So I'm just going to go ahead and share some of those if we want to stop at any point, because there's another question that comes in that's related. We can cover that. But so one of the first questions we got was a question about, so under current North Carolina law, is it not true that any changes made to the UDO in this rewrite process must be to make the UDO less strict? Otherwise, Durham will need to have the express permission of affected property owners to make the change. The answer being, so this is referring to legislation that was adopted in December of this last year. It limits a local government's ability to initiate what's called a downzoning, or referred to as a downzoning. It's in Senate Bill 382, and that legislation broadens the definition of downzoning with carve-outs for residential districts. So this would apply for non-residential districts. Our new UDO regulations would only apply to new development. And the new UDO will be compliant with that North Carolina law. We also got a question about established neighborhoods as we were talking about tree coverage in particular. So what about established neighborhoods? Will these new standards cover those locations as well? The answer is yes. New construction within established neighborhoods will now be required to provide 7% of that lot as tree coverage, either by preserving 7% of that existing forest cover on site or by planting native trees as replacement. And that comes from a current neighborhood protection overlay standard that would be applied across broadly. Additionally, related to tree canopy, so by maintaining the current tree canopy standards, are we missing an opportunity to improve tree canopy? I'm especially concerned about areas where overall canopy is lower due to structural racism from planting practices generations ago. The response to that is, so the new 7% requirement, again, is for existing development is intended to introduce tree coverage to areas which have not historically had tree coverage. Additionally, while some areas are retaining existing tree canopy standards, for some districts, we're also expanding canopy requirements in other areas like that 7%. We're also working with urban forestry to conduct a tree canopy assessment that will guide future plantings and determine any necessary policy shifts. We did have a few questions related to riparian or stream buffers. So just clarifying, so riparian buffer changes are limited to enhanced understandability, right? Correct. Enhanced understandability and updating to the most recent version of rules for the Neuse River Basin, as Robin said, by referencing that state legislation directly. So yes, another clarifying question, no policy changes, correct? Correct. We're retaining all existing policy for watershed protection and riparian buffer protection. Let's see. We then have some open space questions. So does the UDO require developers to make their submitted open spaces permanently protected, and how is that enforced? So developers are required to submit legal documents with their site plans, which denote how any required open space will be maintained in perpetuity. So it has to be dedicated forever. If that's not followed, then residents can report those to our zoning enforcement work group within the Planning and Development Department, and they will issue citations until the open space is brought back into compliance with the adopted plans. We have a question related to the Clean Water Act, stormwater things that Robin was talking through. So this question, does the Federal Clean Water Act permit relate to Durham's city ordinance and the city's stormwater regulations, which mandate the following? Quote, any multifamily development which exceeds 500 square feet of impervious surface triggers stormwater control standards, which is one reason why multifamily development currently requires site plan review and the provision of a stormwater impact analysis with the potential for engineered controls. Or does the federal permit only relate to the following disturbance thresholds? Quote, land disturbance shall be less than 1 acre in the Jordan Reservoir watershed, 12,000 square feet in the Falls Reservoir watershed, and a half acre in the Neuse River Basin. So these thresholds that were quoted are denoted within the Stormwater Management Plan, which is required as part of that clean water permit. So that the city can denote how it's addressing stormwater discharge into any federal waterways. That being said, we're not sure if those thresholds are explicitly required as part of the Clean Water Act permit. And another question about that permit, if it does only relate to the thresholds, can the city ordinance regulate small multifamily development like quads and triplexes be amended or updated to match the federal permit thresholds? And that is something we are working with stormwater staff to think more about as part of this project. We've got just a couple more here. A question about how does the UDO ensure that public art isn't preferentially chosen for the open space requirement instead of green spaces? So the public art incentive only allows for 1% of the required open space to be met with public art, which does not meet all of the required open space. So in addition, public art can't replace required tree coverage or the preservation of natural and cultural resources subsection for new subdivisions. So it's incentivizing public art, but it's not allowing that to replace open space. We've got a question about what percent of the units are affordable. So planning and development staff are going to be presenting recommendations for both the compact and affordable options that are included in the RD, RX, and CX, or the RX and CX are our residential mixed use and commercial mixed use zoning districts to the Joint City County Planning Committee at their November 5th meeting. Those are going to include the level of affordability, required tenure, and minimum amount required to take advantage of the incentive. And the presentation will have similar details for the compact option. So we're working on that, and we'll be sharing that soon. Let's see. We've also got a question about whether the new UDO will require integrated mixed housing types in greenfield development or just allow it. So there's not a requirement in the current draft for a mix of housing types within greenfield development, but we're still working through these standards. And we have discussed a mix of housing types once developments reach a certain threshold of units. And a follow-up question on that without a rezoning, asking if there's a way to incentivize it. So one way that we're attempting to incentivize that unit mix is by restricting the type of unit within the RD zoning district. For example, townhouses can't be built within the base RD district or RD1 unless they are 1,200 square feet or less, which is not often the case in what we're seeing for townhouse development. However, we are currently considering allowing up to 25% of units within new RD subdivisions to be townhomes, with further incentives being considered for alley-loaded units. And then just a reminder to everyone that if you have ideas for additions or modifications to these standards, new UDO at durhamnc.gov, which we can drop in the chat, is the project email address. We'd love to hear more suggestions as well. Just a couple more here. So thanks for the mock-ups of mixed housing unit communities. However, is this a reality we are pushing or working towards throughout the city? Yes, that's the intent of many of the zoning districts that are being proposed. There are also further incentives throughout the code for development to provide a mix of housing types. And a question about, can new ordinances be introduced at any time? And yes, text amendments to the Unified Development Ordinance will still be a tool for us to update the ordinance carrying forward. And let's see, we've got a question about how environmentally sensitive and or important, how will environmentally sensitive or important properties be protected from development? One of the things you'll notice is that we no longer allow conservation subdivisions within the UDO. Instead, we've taken the required conservation areas from those conservation subdivisions and are now applying those to all subdivisions. You can see those requirements in both the tree coverage and open space, including the preservation of natural and cultural resources sections. And our department is also currently working on a county open space plan that will kick off in January, I believe, to guide protections to more areas proactively. What is the context here? This is about the text, the amendments to the ordinance question, just asking if that process begins with a meeting with planning. And yes, there is a process provided to petition for an amendment to the UDO. However, because we're in the middle of this project, if you want to suggest a change to this UDO that is being drafted, we can take that into account as we're continuing to revise the draft, and sending an email to newudo@durhamnc.gov is a great way to start that and start a discussion. And last question in here, that under our answered questions, what exactly is considered new development within established communities? There's out of control development all around me, yet my neighborhood is not reaping any new benefits. I'm not sure what current standards are and new to this area of our UDO. So new development within established communities is for any RD zoning district lot that's not a new subdivision. That's where the new standard kicks in. Basically, we want more trees everywhere that there's new development proposed.
Awesome. It looks like we have two more questions and two new questions. The first one from Barbara. Will these questions and answers be preserved and provided with the UDO documents?
Yeah, we can absolutely put together this document and share it on the website, as well as all of this information as part of the recording. So anybody who listens to the recording can get this information.
Okay, great. And then the final question in the open chat is from Amanda. Can you explain the rationale thinking around rezoning residentially zoned areas, especially public housing sites, to mixed use zoning? Matt, Robin, were you planning on answering that one?
Yeah, I can speak a little bit to that one. So, a lot of the mixed use zoning districts came about as part of the comprehensive plan's goal of creating developments for folks, for residents, where they can actually get the things that they need without having to be in a car always, right? So, when we think about mixed use, we're thinking about residential and non-residential together. Often the non-residential is on the bottom floor, residential on the top floor, trying to decrease the amount of time that people have to be in a car to get those necessities. And so part of the idea of, I don't think that we necessarily looked, especially at public housing sites, and said this needs to be mixed use. But what we did try to do was focus areas around existing transit corridors, so that we can support that high density in places where folks can already move without a car, hopefully, right? So trying to really densify within the UGB wherever possible. Within those areas, it also calls for um, you know uh, a percentage of affordability. So we don't want those areas to just serve certain communities, right? So public housing sites are a great example of, usually government-owned land. And by zoning it for mixed use, we are then providing opportunities should, that government entity choose to redevelop it to have more options to provide those residents better services, access to non-residential without having to get in a car, right? Which we know is often limited. Having a car is crazy expensive for all of us. So trying to make sure that we can provide a mix of services for all residents along our existing transit corridors. So that's a great question.
Fantastic. And it looks like that was the final question in the Q&A chat. Lisa, how are we doing on timing?
We are a little bit over our allotted time, so I think unless there are other pressing questions that pop up, just a reminder to everyone that we will, like with all of the other code connects for the project, we'll be posting this on the project website, and there is a specific playlist on the city's YouTube channel about the project, the new UDO. So you can revisit the recordings, you can share those with folks who weren't able to attend. We do want to reiterate the invitation to you, your friends, your family, your neighbors, to come to one of our upcoming engagements, come to office hours. And I dropped a couple of links in the chat, both to where you can find the upcoming engagement opportunities and you can register for those, as well as the project email address where you can send questions if you've got those. So we really appreciate everybody's interest in this project and helping us figure out how to make this better as we go along. So thank you all for showing up tonight.
Okay.
And with that, have a great night, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.